So in this video we discuss permanent positive aggregate demand shock, and as usual we start with economy and medium run equilibrium. Now it's better. So we assume that initial level of output is equal to potential level of output, and this corresponds to the level of interest rate, Rs. So we assume that, okay, again, a piece of technical advice: if you will analyze positive inflationary or aggregate demand shock, start at the lowest possible point. So here we have Phillips curve in period 0, and for Phillips curve in period 0, expected level of inflation is equal to target level of inflation, or pi tau. And here we have monetary rule. Okay, good enough. So when we discuss permanent aggregate demand shock, then IS curve is gonna shift and just stay at the same position. Okay. Okay, good enough. IS prime. So we move from point A, the point of initial equilibrium, to point B. So the level of output, which corresponds to the same interest rate, but on the new IS curve. So then we have level of output equal to Y0, because inflation aggregate demand shock occurs in period 0. And we have level of inflation in period 0, which is pi 0. So just to summarize, what happens in period 0? So basically, moving from point A to point B, output moves from potential output to Y0. We end up the period with inflation equal to pi 0. And in order to define interest rate in period 0, we have to predict the shape of the Phillips curve in the first period first. We have to start with predicting the shape of Phillips curve in the first period. So here we have it. So this is PC1, and for Phillips curve in period 1, expected level of inflation is equal to inflation in period 0, because again we deal with adaptive inflationary expectations. I believe I emphasized this many times, but the idea behind the adaptive inflationary expectations is that when predicting level of inflation in period t, you just take the level of inflation in period t minus 1. So this is what we have here. Okay, so maybe I will show these points here as well. So A, B. So central bank knows that in the first period, this will be the shape of Phillips curve, based on this level of inflation in period 0. So central bank will charge interest rate accordingly. And for this interest rate, you do not take old IS curve, but the new IS curve, because we assume that this shock is permanent. You know, this is our new IS curve. We will not get back to the old IS curve. So this is interest rate in period 0. Yes. And we shift from Rx to R0. Fine. So here we are done with analysis for the period 0. So here, you know, on the intercept of monetary rule and Phillips curve, you have point C. So maybe I can show it here as well. Yeah, so basically, as you remember, central bank always attempts to be located on the monetary rule curve. So here we are in period 1. So, you know, since we assumed 1 period lag in interest rate, then we actually finally, you know, shift from point B to point C. And the corresponding level of inflation is I1. So the corresponding level of output is here, Y1. So we end up with Y1 and Y1. Again, Y1 is lower than Y0. Which means that for the next period, for period 2, Phillips curve will shift down. Because again, in comparison to the old Phillips curve, the value of intercept will be smaller, and central bank predicts that in the second period, Phillips curve will be located here. So here the optimal point for the central bank is point D. And in order to achieve this point in the second period, central bank has to change interest rate in period 1. Because we have 1 period lag. So D R1. So we end up this period with Y1, and R1. That's it. So let's analyze what will happen in the second period. So in the second period, you know, this interest rate actually works. We can finally see the effect of this interest rate R1 because there is 1 period lag. So we move from point C to point D, which happens in the second period. And we end up with the level of inflation, Y2. Okay, so then, you know, the same trend will continue. So the next Phillips curve will shift down and down and down until finally you reach the initial point of the long run equilibrium. So for corresponding to the long run level of output, so using this graph, you know, since we have the new level of output, here we have RS prime. It was supposed to be parallel, but you've got the idea. So this will be a new interest rate in the medium run equilibrium. So finally, let's do response analysis. Okay, inflation output interest rate. So here we have period 0, and here we have period 1. Okay, so initial level of inflation was pi tau, and it was there until the positive aggregate demand shock, which occurred in period 0. So in period 0, we have rapid increase in inflation from pi tau to pi 0. So here we have it to y0. And then, it was decreasing slowly until it reached the initial level. Looks fine. So for output, initially there was on the medium run equilibrium corresponding to potential output. Then there was a shock in period 0 here. So the value of output increased to y0, then it decreased to y1, and then it was slowly increasing until it reached the initial level. So here we have for output. And finally for interest rate. So we started with Rs, then in period 0 it increased, and then it was slowly decreasing, but not to Rs, but to Rs prime. So basically now we have new level of interest rate in equilibrium corresponding to the level of potential output because we have new IS curve. So here it is. I hope it's fine. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me, and thank you for watching.